This video of cute, adorable little lumpfish has over 6 million views on TikTok and made me absolutely fuming angry, and reminded me of the Soviet Union. Now every time I see a lumpfish, I see a little Lenin face on it. Horrible. I never thought I'd get triggered by a fish, particularly one which looks like a bloody Pokemon, but then again, here we are. I'll get to the USSR in a second, but first, why should you be peeved about this video of adorable little lumpsuckers? The owner of this video, James Sibley from Sibley Aqua, seems like a nice enough guy, and I'm not really here to smear people. That's not what I want the channel to be about. I want it to be about history and philosophy and ideas. But just have a think about what you're seeing here in the video. Let me play a clip.
Check it out. We've got lumpfish. Oh my god, this is the best day ever. Alright, today I'm visiting a lumpfish hatchery in North Wales. And as silly as these fish are, there's a lot going into farming them, so stick around if you want to learn all about farming lumpies. Native to the North Atlantic, lumpfish are quite unique in a lot of ways, as you can probably tell.
Cute, right? But what you're looking at is tens of thousands of animals stuffed together in really close proximity, destined to be starved, potentially diseased, and ultimately killed on salmon farms. This sat badly with me, particularly as I scrolled through the comments and I didn't see a single soul actually pointing out that this was a factory farm or thinking that anything was amiss here. They just loved the cute lumpfish. And who can blame them? Now, before anyone objects and says, well, fish can't feel pain, come on, grow up. Fish can feel pain, they're sentient animals, there's a scientific consensus on this issue. How do we know exactly? Well, through careful study, and shout out to Dr. Lynn Snedden here, who's been a massive pioneer in this area. One particular experiment really demonstrated how fish can feel pain quite nicely. In the study, there were two groups of zebrafish, or zebrafish if you prefer, and essentially they had a choice of two tanks. One was a completely barren tank, which was also quite brightly lit. The other was a dimly lit tank filled with seaweed and places to hide, enrichments, environmental enrichments essentially. Of course, naturally the fish preferred the enriched tank when given a choice. But if you took one of these zebrafish and injected them in their lip with some mild acid, not very nice, the fish would prefer the barren tank when and only when the barren tank was filled with painkillers. Suppressing their own pain mattered more to these fish than having some funky seaweed to hide in. So now that you know that fish feel pain, you better believe me when I say that these lumpfish are destined to a whole world of it. Lumpfish are often severely malnourished on salmon farms where they are kept to eat sea lice, tiny carnivorous decapod crustaceans which predate on salmon, which suck on them. They're little parasites basically. In fact, these tiny crustaceans are an absolute blight on the salmon industry. They kill millions of salmon every single year. You see, in the wild, salmon range over hundreds of miles with their epic migrations, and because of their constant swimming, they might pick up one or maybe two of these little sea lice. However, farmed salmon, stuck as they are in these giant underwater cages, swimming aimlessly in circles in their tens of thousands, are sitting ducks, or rather, sitting fish. Gigantic swarms of sea lice will form around these cages, and the salmon can't escape. They are literally eaten alive. The thing is, sea lice are not all that lumpfish eat in the wild, but they are all they eat on salmon farms. Campaigner Don Staniford has done an excellent job documenting the miserable lives of lumpfish on these Scottish salmon farms. Take a look at this picture. I will warn you, it's quite harrowing. So here is a photo of a lumpfish on a Scottish salmon farm. As you can see, the lice have eaten his eyes. So now can you understand why I was frustrated that lumpfish farming is being sold to us in this cutely packaged little video? Of course people love lumpfish. I love the little rascals, but the whole cruel reason why they're there in the first place on this farm is being obscured by this cute music. But anyway, what has any of this got to do with communism and the Soviet Union? Well, around about the same time I was raging at this TikTok, I was also reading a book on Tibetan Buddhism and about the Chinese conquest, colonization, and atrocities they committed in that country. Of course, with such heinous acts also came a lot of filthy propaganda. The Chinese Communist Party declared that they were Tibetans' big brothers come to liberate them from serfdom and superstition. They'd hold struggle sessions, an evil euphemism in itself, for Buddhist monks and opponents of the Chinese regime, where people were essentially publicly humiliated, sometimes tortured and forced to confess that they were enemies of the working class. Sometimes after these struggle sessions, people were summarily executed. I was also reminded of some of the sicker images from the Soviet Union. You might know this one. What do you think of it? It was extremely popular in its day in the Soviet Union. It was even made into bronze statues. Stalin looks like a Soviet Santa Claus posing there with this little girl. Ah, he's not so bad, right? The photo was taken in 1936. In 1938, this girl's father was executed, with no evidence being produced, although he was accused of being a Trotskyist and a Japanese spy. The little girl, her name was Engelsina Markizova, wrote letters to Stalin begging him to spare her father's life. He, of course, never responded. Later that very same year, her mother, who had been exiled to Kazakhstan, also mysteriously died. Now, declassified documents from the Russian secret police seem to suggest that she too was killed. Now, hold up. You might think that it's strange and maybe a bit of a reach to make a comparison between the work of a aquaculture TikTok influencer and the propaganda of literally some of the most bloodthirsty totalitarian regimes which have ever walked the face of the planet Earth. Fair enough. But I do think there is a strong strain of similarity here. Both are using positive messaging and language to disguise what is in fact the exact opposite. And since we're talking about communism and propaganda, we better talk about one of the greatest writers to deal with these topics, George Orwell. Orwell was a genius writer. Now, you've probably heard his name brought up in some pretty, cringeworthy and lame ways, i.e. people are like Big Brother, always watching my videos and yet not really liking, subscribing and commenting too often. We're literally in 1984. Orwell's unorthodoxy remains really appealing to me and I'm sure lots of other people. He was a democratic socialist famous for opposing the Soviet Union. He was a man of letters, a bookish man who also had the physical courage to go and fight in the front lines of the Spanish Civil War for the Republicans. His 1946 essay, Politics and the English Language, is a dynamite handbook for sniffing out bullshit. Allow me to quote you a passage. In our time, political speech and writing are largely the defense of the indefensible. Things like the continuance of British rule in India, the Russian purges and deportations, the dropping of the atom bombs on Japan, can indeed be defended, but only by arguments which are too brutal for most people to face and which do not square with the professed aims of political parties. Thus, political language has to consist largely of euphemism, question-begging, and sheer cloudy vagueness. Defenseless villages are bombarded from the air, the inhabitants driven out into the countryside, the cattle machine-gunned, the huts set on fire with incendiary bullets. This is called pacification. Millions of peasants are robbed of their farms and sent trudging along the roads with no more than they can carry. This is called transfer of population or rectification of frontiers. People are imprisoned for years without trial, or shot in the back of the neck, or sent to die of scurvy in Arctic lumber camps. This is called elimination of unreliable elements. Such phraseology is needed if one wants to name things without calling up mental pictures of them. So, where do we find such language today in our society? Is this lumpfish TikTok part of a wider trend? Animal agriculture is an industry within our own Western liberal democracies which lies as flagrantly as any tin pot dictator or true believer. Their attempts to disguise standard industry practices are relentless and understandably so. Presenting the life of a pig from pen to plate in regular Anglo-Saxon will make many a consumer queasy, and the industry knows this. Slicing off the tip of a chicken's beak is therefore described as beak conditioning. The men who slaughter the chickens who haven't been killed by the automatic killing machine have been rebranded from backup killers to knife operators. It sounds as though they could be roughly chopping vegetables. The word insanguinated sounds pretty elegant. I wouldn't shudder if I heard that a chicken had met this fate, but it means bled to death. We are told that animals face humane slaughter, even though there are accounts of animals boiling to death, freezing alive, or even being skinned while still conscious. Slaughterhouse is also not a popular word, so substitute in meat plant. And you know what? That's exactly how animals are seen, as plants. whose killing is often described as a harvest. I hope you don't feel patronised if I point out that the inside of an abattoir is rather different to a field of summer corn. Orwell makes the case that the use of Latin, Greek, scientific, and jargon words can actually obscure meaning. They can fall upon the facts like soft snow, blurring the outlines and covering up all the details. There is nothing so mystical or highfalutin about killing animals that merits the use of the word insanguinated. To seek the truth is to call a spade, even if the animal industry would rather call it an earth redistribution device. The meat industry may flourish on euphemisms and word games, but they didn't invent them all. Some are baked into English itself, so where did these come from? Many slippery words were introduced into English due to, of all things, the outcome of the Battle of Hastings. Post-1066, the English ruling class became French-speaking Normans, while the Anglo-Saxons remained as farmhands and huntsmen. As a result of this class divide, the names of living animals who still remained in the world of peasants, like pig, cow, sheep, deer, and calf, retained their Germanic character. Meanwhile, cooked animals served up to dukes and barons on the family silver took on French names: pork, bacon, beef, mutton, venison, and veal. Now, these words turn cooked meats into a distinct category of object, obscuring their animal origins. Perhaps some alternative history writing can get us closer to the truth. If we pretend that Harold Godwinson and his housecarls won at Hastings, and we excise the French from our dictionary, we observe some more honest results. So pork becomes pig corpse, bacon is slices of pig belly, beef is cow flesh, mutton, sheep muscle, venison is deer cadaver, veal is baby cow hunks. If this terminology doesn't sit easily with you, then interrogate your feelings. The descriptions are accurate. This is actually the approach that Orwell advocates, a very clear and deliberate use of language to convey things as honestly as possible. But unfortunately, the issue of language is merely the tip of a tentacle. Our dissociation between animal products and animal cruelty goes far deeper than this. Headless, featherless, vacuum-packed chickens don't even look like animals. They don't feel like animals, even though they share a name with the curious, lively cluckers who so many people unfortunately rarely meet. Perhaps more stringent marketing rules could really help here. A minuscule minority of chickens, under 5%, actually live outside or get to go outside and have the sun on their backs, which is not the impression you'd get from looking at your average supermarket packaging. But of course, this industry could never honestly evaluate its own practices. To do so would mean owning up to the destruction of animal life on an indefensible scale, as well as the slashing and burning of various ecologies. And, of course, it would mean cutting the profits of a massive industry which, between meat and dairy, is worth nearly $2 trillion worldwide. As Upton Sinclair, the author of vintage meat industry expose The Jungle, would have it, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. So instead, the animal industry blames its opponents. Soy-guzzling vegans are responsible for the Amazon being destroyed is a famous lie. No matter that 72% of Amazon deforestation is done for cattle farming, no matter that 77% of global soy is grown to feed cows, pigs, and chickens. It's a cascade of lies the size of Niagara Falls. Orwell tried to root out falseness and hypocrisy wherever he found it. Yet, I won't offer a misleading view of him. He is on record as being an opponent of vegetarians, who he'd no doubt lump in with those other quixotic lefties. That dreary tribe of high-minded women and sandal wearers and bearded fruit juice drinkers who come flocking to the smell of progress like blue bottles to a dead cat. So good. But ultimately, I think Orwell was unreflective in his view of animals. Here is a man who could write in Shooting an Elephant that, "I did not want to shoot the elephant. I watched him beating his grass against his knees with that preoccupied, grandmotherly air that elephants have. It seemed to me that it would be murder to shoot him." Or later, as the elephant struggles for life. "It seemed dreadful to see the great beast lying there, powerless to move and yet powerless to die, and not even being able to finish him. The tortured gasps continued as steadily as the ticking of a clock. In the end, I could not stand it any longer, and went away." He also wrote movingly about toads, about their beautiful eyes and their love of randy wrestling. So should he really have been so scathing about animal rights? His own example reveals the most persistent problem. Despite great reticence, He shot the elephant, solely to avoid looking a fool to a crowd of Burmese onlookers. It is a sobering fact that even a mind as alert and principled as Orwell's could cave into the pressure to conform. The demands on him, an English policeman in colonial Burma, aren't actually as alien as they might first seem. The desire to be normal is a really potent one. If you aren't normal, then you're an outcast, a pariah, a freak. The expectation for animals to die for us remains strong, and those who profit from this expectation reinforce it with positive emotions so that it never shrinks. Dishonest language makes it easy for us to take the feel-good theme tune of a lumpfish farm or the happy faces on a tortured cut of meat at face value. Even when people suspect that something is wrong, even when they intuit that gassing a pig or shooting an elephant is actually quite a cruel thing to do, they can proceed to do it anyway, driven on by the expectations of a society or a culture or an economy. But Orwell grasped the helplessness of this conformity, that even an imperialist can be a marionette of his own making, desperate to impress his subjects, straitjacketed by his desire to appear formidable, and reduced to a hollow, posing dummy. He wears a mask and his face grows to fit it. It remains true that no matter how gentle the animal industry makes its language, most people still horror at the sight of an animal suffering. Elephants, yes, but chickens, cows, and lumpfish too. Yet despite humanity's fondness for animals, when the dinner bell trills, they vanish from our mind, like vapor. Even if we swaddle ourselves in thousands of comfortable euphemisms, the facts of the meat processing plant do not change. Orwell, like most people, looked at meat and saw food, like he looked at vegetarians and saw cranks. He did not realize, or chose not to see, that meat is the groans of dying elephants, of chickens plunged in scalding tanks, of pigs writhing in harvest. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.